All right. Welcome everyone. My name's Chris, and I'll be introducing Wayne today. So welcome for all being here. It's a pleasure, and it's great that everyone has come and that people have shown interest. And it's good to see some faces I've never seen before, so it's excellent. We all have something in common here today, and we're going to find out more. So I hope you walk away today with more learnings and education and further research about what Wayne's going to share with us today. I think he's got some very important things to share with us, so look forward to that. So I'd like to make a special thank you to Kelly, Martine, Sam, Melanie, Mel and Abby, and all others that supported this and marketing and everything, and getting it out there. So thank you very much. So just a small agenda for today. Wayne will start his talk. We'll go for about 90 minutes, and we'll have about a 15-minute break, tea and coffee all up the back and so forth, and some water there, so help yourself. And toilets are out the door there. So anyway, I'll just give a introduction to Wayne. So Wayne Glue is an ex-policeman from Geraldton, Western Australia. Like many others who are now well versed in common law and our Commonwealth of Australian Constitution Act 1901, Wayne was forced to expand his knowledge due to the unlawful acts on him by the Geraldton Council. So Wayne's words, a bigger bunch of lying thieves you are unlikely to meet outside of any state and federal parliament. So the Geraldton Council has tried to steal Wayne's land from him, first through unlawful court orders and later by sheer theft and vandalism. So Wayne also has a YouTube channel, Liability Mate, so you can find more information there. So as you know, more and more people are waking up around Australia and just about our rights and freedoms. Like, we look at what's going on in Victoria and something's really not right. So, you know, I hope we really have more people waking up and opening their eyes about what's going on. And Wayne's going to open a fair bit of us today. So anyway, welcome Wayne. Round of applause.
Right, welcome to everybody. What I'd like to say before we get started, if a question comes to mind, stick up your hand like you're in school, I won't answer it. The reason being because if you don't get the questions answered straight away, comes to the end of the session when you want to answer the questions or ask them, you'll forget. Even though I've got a good memory, I do the same, so don't worry, you will get over it. Right, first thing we're going to deal with is starting before Federation. How things come about and who really is sovereign and supreme in this country. So I'll go to Hansard, the 10th of the 3rd, 1891, National Australian Convention. No parliament under Federation can be a constituent body. It will cease to have the power of changing its constitution at its own will. Then Dr. Coburn, 3rd, 1891, Parliament has been the supreme body, but when we embark on Federation, we throw parliamentary sovereignty overboard. Parliament is no longer supreme. Our parliaments at present are not only legislative, but constituent bodies. This is before Federation, by the way. They have not only the power of legislation, but the power of amending their constitution without going to the people. That must disappear at once on the abolition of parliamentary sovereignty. No parliament under a federation can be a constituent body. It will cease to have the power of changing its constitution at its own will. And that happened on 1st of January 1901. They lost the lot. And then you go to Mr. Glenn, 9th of the 2nd, 1898. We ought not to create the evil of making the judges not merely interpreters, but the extenders of our Constitution. If we ought to give the Constitution such a degree of elasticity, we will render it incapable of being moulded to the changed conditions as time goes on and prevent the dangerous alternative of judicial expansion, which is interfering with the Constitution, which they do now, quite rarely, and they think it's fun, but we give it to them and they give it back again. There we go to Mr. Barton, the 2nd of the 3rd, 1898. I did not say that. I say that our real status is as subjects, and that we are all alike subjects of the British Crown, which we are. Dr. Quick, one of the people who wrote Quick and Gowan, the Red Constitution, if we are to have a citizenship of the Commonwealth, higher, more comprehensive and nobler than that of the states, I would ask why it is not implanted in the Constitution. Mr. Barton was not present when I made my remarks in proposing the clause. I then anticipated the point he has raised as to the position we occupy as subjects of the British Empire. I took occasion to indicate that in creating a federal citizenship and in defining the qualification of that federal citizenship, we are not in any way interfering with our position as subjects of the British Empire. It would be beyond the scope of the Constitution to do that. We might be citizens of a city, citizens of the colony, or citizens of a Commonwealth, but we would still be subjects of the Queen. That's taken from Hansard 10 years before Federation, right up until 1900. And the reason I read from that, because most people say, really, is it accurate? Yes, it is. It's all there in writing. There's some 55,000 pages of documentation from the Australasian Council and colonies before Federation. The colonies were not states before Federation, which is what the state parliament claims they are now. They're not. They were colonies. They were penal colonies. It was full of mainly criminals, except for South Australia. They just turned criminals after them. Really done. But now, in relation to the Parliament, you go to page 676, last 2 lines on that page, next couple on the next page, it says, the Parliament is not supreme, and the very essence of federation is that must be so. The Parliament, like everyone else, is subject to the law and must abide by it. What that means is Mark McGowan, we call him Yap McGowan, he's been yapping about something, passed a whole heap of laws which were just blatant treason. You can't say it's anything else, because he put the Parliament above everything and said you can't prosecute. Yeah, well, good luck with that, you're already prosecuted. Yes?
Well, how does that go with what he's done to try and stop Parliament?
I'll come to that in a minute, after I do it, because that's a good subject to get on, actually. Because Palmer actually sued him, not us. And when you find out how, you'll laugh at him, but he's an idiot. Now, in relation to sovereignty, we are sovereign. Go to the middle of the last paragraph on page 791 of our Constitution. It says, neither the federal nor the state parliament are sovereign bodies. They are simply legislatures with limited authority. If they attempt to pass a law in excess of that authority, the law is a nullity and affords no obedience. None. We can just ignore any law. And they know that. That's why they put penalties in for not giving samples of your breath. Because lawfully we can tell them to get off. I don't suggest you do it. It's not good to do that. Now, just so to satisfy your question, Palmer sued the state parliament because they issued contracts, signed them, and then withdrew them.
Yes, I knew that.
He was lawfully able to do what he did. He got a judgment of $32 billion against the state of Western Australia. But there's 2 states of Western Australia. There's one created under 107, 108 and 109 of our Constitution, which is us. We are the state. And the other one is created under Section 8 of the Acts Amendment Repeals Court and Legal Practice Act. It came into law, they say, it came into being a statute in 1st of January 2004. Now, what Palmer did, he's got a judgment all right. Wait and see if he tries to inflict it on us, because he can't. His next problem is, 4 years ago, I seized the 3 lawful tiers of the state government.
Sorry, all that.
Yeah, well, that knocked it out because I hold it under the Crown as an officer of the Crown for and on behalf of the people until they take the matter to the Privy Council or House of Lords to overturn what I did. I don't have to do nothing. That's why people said, what are you doing? I said, just leave it. Leave it alone. Then I went after the federal government for the same reason and filed it on the 7th of January last year. And before the House of Lords, the High Court of England and the Royal Court of Justice. Why? Because we can do it. A simple little bit of filling out documents and we're able to do it. Anybody is. I did it as a Commonwealth public official because I was sworn in on the 16th of January 2012 as a Commonwealth public official. I was already a Commonwealth public officer because I took up my oath in the police force to the Crown, the proper Crown. Now anybody who's been in the military would have taken that oath unless it's after about 1978 when they removed it or put in Queen of Australia. Well, we always reckon that's our governor in the Tutu, these would make a good queen, but it's actually another person who was in Parliament at the time. Right.
Can we have that name?
I'll give it to you in a minute.
Yeah, right on a piece of paper.
What happened in 1973, Walt Whitman signed the Treaty of Rome, which is the Union Treaty. He took everything that belongs to this country, you, me, your cars, your house, your kids, your working capacity, what you earn in your lifetime, and give it to Rome. Didn't give it to the Vatican like people claim, that's not true. They gave it to Rome, a different place. Same area, but much different system.
Is that the city of Rome, as in the city of Vatican?
The city of Rome has got the Jesuits, which have got a bridge straight into Rome, and they are actually who I'm talking about. The Jesuits are right throughout. They're the ones that run the Jesuits.
How does that work in relation to, as I understand it, birth certificates were created by the Vatican, so where does that?
They actually weren't.
They weren't, okay.
And I come up with that because I gave you that document, and this gentleman over here that introduced me,
Chris.
if you see him, he will get them printed to you. It's the Electoral Act of 1889,
Yeah.
and in there it relates to how they set it up and why they set it up. And the birth certificates were actually set up under the Crown,
Right.
and they were set up by the Queen, so that there would be a public record of births, deaths and marriages. It's all set together, and there's a special magistrate that sits over that. And he also deals with electoral boundaries and electoral acts and breaches of the electoral acts, and the inability of somebody to sit as a member of Parliament and everything else. It's all dealt with and all under that particular act. Did you read it? No, you know. You want me to read your stuff and you didn't read mine, naughty boy. All right, that's the last one. That's not if I read all your stuff. This here is a letters patent putting in place the Office of Governor. It was put in by Queen Victoria on the 29th of October 1900 with a letters patent, along with every single station in the country got the same. Each governor is set up individually under a letters patent. And that letters patent under 6.1.9, the Statute of Monopolies, states very clearly only the reigning monarch can change it. You can't. No one has. In fact, they reiterated the fact it's locked in. Now, this is the Government Gazette, copy of, which locks it into place, and it states it's a letters patent. The reason I've given you this is to show you this, here. We could only get a short number printed before we came down here. In fact, we picked them up the day before. We can now get them done, and we will converse with the people here so that you can get them with the send copies, they can print them themselves locally to save money.
Excellent.
Because otherwise we're going to print, you're going to have to write to us, send us the postage, send us the cost and send them back. But as you can see, they're a nice secure document. One thing you will get along with these is the original state constitution of Western Australia, the correct one, not the one they put in the Federation. I'll come back to that in a minute. And the reason I'm going through that is a lot of people want to know, have we got a constitution, where is it, why can't we get it? If can't get it because our nice little friend John Forrest, his last parting gesture to Western Australia before we went into Federation, he actually blocked Federation for 3 to 4 weeks because he took control of the Mint. Now, if you want to read all about that, you head to Kalgoorlie, go to the Boulder Hall, all eastern wall from one end to the other. It's got the whole history of how they blocked Federation for Western Australia, even though we were a founding state. The people couldn't go in until we completed the referendum. Forrest wouldn't give the miners the correct amount of money for their gold, so they wouldn't take part. It blocked the whole lot. There were 2/3 of the population of Western Australia at the time. The mine was that's a heck of an amount of power to have in your hands, which is good. And they exercise it, which is even better. It's called people power. Now, and by the way, Forrest died on the way back to England from tuberculosis, so he never got his knighthood, which is good. I thought that was good. So, right, now we go to the other states. To find out if the other states are covered by the legislation for the office of governor, you go to section 72 of the Constitution. It states quite clearly, the Governor-General shall select all judges for the Federal Court and the High Court of Australia. And then it says in the annotations, this section does not by necessity apply to the states, as each state has a letters patent restricting the office of governor and how the judges are selected and how the states run. And all their letters patent which will be available to you. Any questions before we go on to a different subject? We're going to go on a lot.
Is that true about Cool Guardian? Is that the same sort of issue they
They were in the same group.
yeah.
There was all gold miners in the gold field.
Yeah.
It extended as far west as Meriden, Westonia and all that. Anything else? No, he's just scratching his head, he's right. All right, now we go on to who is the government. And most people say, yes, you were scratching your head too. I'm going to tell me can't hear my voice. They call me Foghorn Lemoine.
It's always his first time.
Yeah, I can.
That's better.
Yeah.
You can hear now. You don't need hearing aids. Right. Now, the subject I brought up last Thursday is the government versus the government to create a system of government. Sounds like double dutch, but it's not. The Commonwealth is the people. If you look, take it outside, so turn it off. No, the Commonwealth is the people. We are sovereign and supreme. If you are religious and you read the Bible and you read the Constitution, you'll find out the principles are exactly the same. The sovereignty is granted to us by Jesus when he said, if you love me, you will follow my commandments. He's given you ultimate supremacy over your future, your life, and your will. And that's where it comes from. The people who wrote the Constitution were Christians. They were actually Church of England, not the type we got now called Anglicans. They're part of the Catholic Church through the Anglican Catholic Corporations Act. The problem which arises by what has taken place in this country is we are both sovereign and supreme. So in Hansard where it says that left the Parliament, went with us. When did we get it? On the 9th of July 1900. 4 months and 25 days before Federation. We became sovereign and supreme and we were federated, but the Federal Parliament wasn't established. So if you want to check on that, you'll find out by reading section 51, subsection 38 of the annotated Constitution. It explains it. It says with the conferral of the parliaments of the states, the Commonwealth can exercise authority at the Federation. And it said it didn't have any. The simple reason is because all 7 states, on the proclamation of the Constitution, 9th of July 1900, the old entities known as the Australasian Council and the colonies ceased to exist. And they did. But even if that wasn't so, there was only 7 legislative areas ever exercisable by the Australasian Council, and even less by the colonies. And all 7 of those are contained in section 51 of the Constitution. Where's the control over land? None. Where's the right to taxpay? None. Where's the right to do anything without the express permission of the Constitution? There isn't any. So then you go to page 701 of the Constitution. Quite easy to find. It's got a diagram on there. And it states, I'll read it so it's clear so I don't get messed up. I don't usually do that, just in case. It says, there's a diagram there. You've got a constitution with access to it. Actually, we've got that on one of my pages. Are we on Facebook?
Yeah, on my page.
Can you repost that when we get home?
Yeah.
So you'll have that actual diagram and the text above it, which explains it. Because what it's saying is the Commonwealth is quasi-sovereign. Quasi-sovereignty, that's us. We're sovereign. But the reason it's quasi is because we've vested our authority in a constitution. That constitution is binding on the courts, judges and people of every state, without exception. Now that sits above the federal parliament. What is a parliament? It's a legislature. It isn't actually an entity of itself. The same goes for the state government. It has a state parliament, a state executive and a state judiciary. At federal level, it has a federal parliament, federal executive and federal judiciary. Now, the reason it's divided into 3 parts because there's a separation of powers between the 3 which can't be crossed. There is a slight bridging of powers between the executive and legislature in as much as at federal level, the Governor-General, when he gets sworn in, and he must swear the correct oath, which this particular one did, then turn around and committed treason. Well, let's not get involved in his crimes. After that, once he is sworn in, he selects 10 members from the lower house, from the House of Representatives. These people are there to represent us, represent what we want them to do, how we wish to be governed, what laws they can pass, and under what authority in our Constitution. If it's not contained there, they don't exist. I'll come back to those issues in a minute, because they need to be explained. Now, he then selects 8 from the upper house. That's from the Senate. Now these 18 members, he gives them the portfolios. There is no federal cabinet, there's no national cabinet, there's no state cabinet. That is just a load of moo-poo. It's garbage. Lies and fraud on the people, and actually blatant treason. Under our Commonwealth Criminal Code, it's treachery to overturn the provisions of the Constitution. The penalty for that is an imprisonment for life. No excuses, no time off. It's a very serious offence for them to manipulate that. Every political party commits that offence, just by its very existence. So we're trying to tell them we don't want to lock them up until they know, when they know we will lock them up if they don't stop. I've just dropped out of the GAP party because they registered as a company. And under 44 of the Constitution, you cannot be part of a company more than 25 people. You're incapable of sitting. That's our Constitution, it's a fact. You overturn that, it's treachery to overturn the Constitution, it's imprisonment for life. I told Cullerton that. And said I'm walking away until you get rid of the ABN or ACN, whichever you did. He didn't like it, but at the end of the day, I stick to my principles and I'm not going away from them. Now or any other time. Don't like it too bad. Right. Now, the Governor-General and Council, as soon as it is established, they sit continually. Does the Parliament? No, it doesn't. Can it collect wages per year? No, it can't. Can it collect it on a weekly basis? No, it can't. Go read the Constitution, section 7 through 23, you will find out how the Parliament is set up. And then you will find out that Governor General and the Executive, they sit and they debate and put legislation together. They cannot go into Parliament and vote in relation to that legislation. The Constitution states they're deemed to be biased towards the legislation they're putting to the Parliament. So they can't. They can, however, sit in Parliament during the debates and put forward the will of their constituents, because they're still representing the people in their constituency. It is not an electoral boundary, and we've got to come back to that, because it's another issue that rises up, especially today with this corona break, or virus, whatever they want to call it. I haven't seen any yet. I haven't got the fly swap. They haven't singled me out yet, put it that way, according to them. All right, let's get back on it. The Governor General, with the Executive Council, puts legislation together. He puts it to the House of Representatives. They debate that legislation. They look at it. It has to be worded correct, seeing there's no backdoor ways to get in and move it or change it or alter it in such a fashion that lawyers can get it and put it a different way than it should be. They then give it to the Senate. The Senate can reject it. The same goes for the budget. They can reject that as well. And they do. And they did to Whitlam. But getting back to the legislation, they also check whether it complies with the Constitution. If it does, it goes back to the Governor General. He signs on behalf of the Queen. That then is a law which binds the Crown to a law made pursuant to the authority granted by our Constitution, because we are sovereign and supreme. We have the sovereignty and supremacy of the Queen through our Commonwealth and our Constitution, because it's an act of the British Parliament assented to lawfully by the Queen. There are sections of the Constitution, when exercised by the Parliament, they must send those particular acts or purported acts to the Queen for her signification. That's the royal prerogative. That has been removed from this country. It was removed in 1973, which is one of the 300 acts changed by Gough Whitlam. Gough Whitlam, the Queen of Australia. If you don't think he is, go and look at the legislation he signed. He signed as the Queen of Australia, Prime Minister. And read all the documents. I was reading them the other day and I was laughing. Everyone's saying this person, that person, the other, the Queen of Australia. He is. But what most people don't know is he's a full-on homosexual. And guess who his boyfriend is? The person who sacked him, Kerr. Now, isn't that enlightening for you? Nice. Well, we knew it. We had garbage in the Parliament after that with Keating and his mob. Yes.
Just wanted to know, with the death of the Queen,
Yes.
and there is no sitting crown,
Yes.
as there currently is,
No, there's not a sitting crown, there's a sitting monarch.
monarch.
The crown is God.
Okay.
The monarch is God's representative through the Church of England, the Protestant faith, which is their coronation oath.
So that's with the wording there about
Yeah.
who, like,
The oath contains the heirs and successors. There are heirs and successors. Successors don't necessarily have to be part of the royal family.
yeah.
Even though everybody says, oh, you got the wrong end of the stick. Yeah, well, you didn't got it too, you should have got it across your head. Whack it up a little bit.
So
The
basically,
nonsense has to stop.
so the crown is talking about Jesus or God?
The crown in our system of law is God, and it's the application of that through Protestant faith and the Church of England. That's why all the political parties got on their high horse and decided to create the Anglican Catholic Corporations Act in 1996 at the hands of Mr. Howe. But all he did is cut his own throat and nullified the whole lot anyway. So yeah, it is, and it isn't how people say, oh, like they're now saying the Queen of Australia, Queen of England and her other realms, and cut out the heirs and successors. And turncoat, it states quite often when the Queen dies now we can install a republic. Well, no, you can't. we don't have a contract with the Queen. We have a contract with God signed by the Queen. There's a hell of a lot of difference. It doesn't overturn just because the monarch dies. But as a lot of people would think it does. You can't have a republic in this country, whether you like it or not. You can't. Go get your constitution, sit down and read it, and where are you going to get it from? Where's the authority? Clause 8 of the Constitution says, and I'll bring something in and I'll go back into it because it opens up another extension of talking. When you look at Clause 8 of the Constitution, it says when the colonies become states, the Boundaries Act no longer applies. However, when the Commonwealth is established, it's established as a self-governing colony of England. So we are not one of the territories or all those things. We are a colony, direct colony of England. We are part of England until we, the people. It says, whereas the people of New South Wales, Queensland, Victoria, Tasmania, South Australia, Western Australia, joined together in one indissoluble federation, the Commonwealth of Australia. It doesn't say we, the government, that we, the people, because we're sovereign and supreme. Now, that puts a can of worms in what they want to do. I mean, Turnbull was on 6PR, would have been 20 years ago, and he was mouthing off about 60% of the people want a republic. So I went on there and this is a talkback show and said,
I remember that actually.
yeah, when I told him, I said, where did you get the 60% from? He said, oh, the people want them. I said, I tell you what, mate, you should get out of the bush, stop asking the kangaroos, rabbits and wombats because they don't get to vote, you fool. He slammed down the phone, but I didn't care. I still got a Divas CD and free meal at the local restaurant. So it was giving him a hard time. Now you know why I give him a hard time, I like food. Yeah, right. No, look, you need to look at the reality of our system. If you look at 106, it allows a continuance of state constitutions subject to the Commonwealth Constitution and altered in accordance with our Constitution. That has to be done. Every state's constitution in its original form was put in place with a legislation on the 29th of October 1900 by Queen Victoria. Now everybody says, yeah, but it was kicked out with the Treaty of Versailles. Well, where in the Constitution does it say one person can overturn the will of all the people in this Commonwealth? One person can take control. It doesn't. In December 1919, Sir Edmund Barton, the first Prime Minister of this country, at that stage had become the Chief Justice of the High Court of Australia. He went before the Federal Parliament and challenged Billy Hughes in relation to his ability to sign the Treaty of Versailles without first going to the people by referendum. And he put a heap of questions to him. Well, they adjourned Parliament to answer the questions in the new year. So Edmund Barton went to a big hotel, which is still there by the way, it's just been rebuilt, between Lura and Lithgow in New South Wales on the Great Western Highway. And over that Christmas period he was poisoned with arsenic. You don't have to be too bright to work out who did it. They didn't want to answer the question, so they got rid of him. The first political assassination in this country. Now let's go back to Clause 8, because it's an interesting clause. It says, and I'll reiterate the fact that the colonies, when they become states, the Boundaries Act no longer applies. Is there a boundary in this country? No, there's one outside of it. There is some inside, but we'll come to that in a minute. The boundary outside is 12 nautical miles off the coast. It is the extremities of this country. They've extended it 200 k's, but knows where they got that authority. The Constitution says 12 nautical miles. That is the only lawful boundary, and only the federal government, nobody else, people coming up the door, only the federal government can deal with boundaries. But they cannot deal with the boundaries on your land, which is the borders on your title. certificate of title. Because you're a proprietor in an estate in fee simple, alienated from the Crown under Chalice Real Property 3rd edition. Nobody, but nobody can touch your property. All water falls on, flows under and flows over belongs to you, except on a navigatable river, or creek, that flows all year round. That's when you can have problems, and I'm not going to get into the water debate because there's certain people on my right know all about that, and I'm looking into it still because that is a huge thing to be investigated. But my belief is you can block the creeks and rivers, but you cannot block its continual flow. You've got to take it off there to one side into receptacles of a dam, tank or whatever. You'll have to deal with that after I finish, and I'm sure the garbage attached to them is a lot to leave me. But the only parliament in this country that has a jurisdiction over water is the federal parliament in relation to the Murray-Darling Basin. They must make sure there's sufficient water in there so that you can paddle the old paddle steamers up. They're flat bottom, so they float in next to nothing. But you can't float in nothing. And they've taken a lot out, given it to the Chinese. We as a people must fight to put that water back. It can't be sold, certainly can't be sold to foreign interests, because they're not naturalised into this country. If you look up 51 of the Constitution on aliens, immigration and immigration, you'll soon see what I'm talking about. You come into this country as an immigrant from another country. My wife is, she's from Indonesia, so that's to immigrate. So she has to be naturalised as a subject of the Queen, not as an Australian citizen. Even though your classification is citizen of the Commonwealth of a town or whatever, it doesn't carry into a citizenship under the Constitution. You have to be naturalised to be a British subject. Why? Because we're still a self-governing colony of England. Yes?
What's the main difference between national and citizen? Was there originally like a nationality act or for the citizen?
It's in the Constitution. 51, you look up aliens, immigration and immigration. The difference between immigration and immigration, which I was going to come to, is anywhere in the British Empire you can move around, albeit if they can prevent you if you've got huge criminal history or other aspects of your outcome aren't within the standing of the people of that country that you're going to. But anywhere in the British Empire you can immigrate. Once you've been there 5 years, you can actually sit in their parliament because you're a British subject. But they try to say, oh no, you've got to have a passport. Actually, you don't. Just like you don't have to have the driver's license. You have to have the driver's license for commerce and trade. To take the kids to school is not commerce and trade. It's quite getting rid of the rug rats so she can have a break. Apparently. No, look. You've got to look at the whole Constitution. You've got to go consistently through it from the beginning to the end. As I said to someone before here, you need to get the Constitution, open it at section 1, read from 1 to 128, be conversant with that. Then go back and attach the annotations to it, because that is actually the Hansard of how the framers came to the conclusion and the interpretation of how it must be interpreted. Not how it can, how it must be. That's a requirement. Now I'll go back to immigration for a minute, because everybody says, well, what are we doing with all these Muslims here and everything else? They can come here. They can come here. You might like it, but they can come here. Communists can come here, socialists can come here. We've got a World Church of Satan that's moved here. They can come here. Why? Because the religion under 116. 116 of the Constitution says no government can legislate against a person's religion, nor can they question it, nor can they use it as a religious barrier to prevent them working for the government. However, it also says, follow our customs and beliefs, assimilate into outside society, or get out. Walking around looking like the old nuns Forcing women to do that, succumb to genital mutilation, is not following our customs and beliefs. It's not assimilating, and they should be booted out, along with thieves and everything else we got in this country. Murderers, assailants, rapists, and they're letting them stay here. Why? Destroy our society. How are they getting away with it? She'll be like, mate, I could have another fag, a couple of beers and go down and watch the footy. Who cares what everyone else is doing? That is the problem with our society. And not getting off your lazy backsides and doing something. And I'm not just referring to you, referring to everybody. And the majority of people in this country have got absolutely no guts whatsoever. They will not call a spade a spade. And comes a nice little sexist remark from me. Women have got more guts than anyone. You have one kid and go back and have another one, you could have a lot of guts, because I wouldn't. You come out of me and no more of them, So, blokes need to go into the bathroom, drop their pants before the mirror and see what if they've got what it takes. And I'm being serious. It is a joking thing, I put it as a joke, but you have to be serious. If you can't stand up and say to a politician, you're a bit of crap, get the hell out of our parliament until you can represent us, where's your problem? It's not with Cobra next door or your family, it's you. What happened to the men of this country that went out? My dad was 16 when he joined the army, pretty table for a little bit, a couple of years. And he went overseas. He was overseas for about 8 months and they found out he was 16, so they shunted him back here. So he changed his name and back in the army again. Typical him. And just before his 18th birthday, they booted him out. So he went and tracked down his father because they were estranged when he was a kid and got him to sign the paper so he could go back in. He ended up a prisoner of war and then reeked a bit of muck because he's got the same attitude as me. I guess like his to a degree. He drank and smoked and squirted and carried on like that. But at the end of the day, we need to look back at our parents, look back at who fought for this country. Look back at where we're going as the Commonwealth of Australia. Look back at what we are going to do for our kids. And I'm sorry if you like living in these dingy little dump shoe called houses here with no land around them. It shouldn't be. It should not be. We should have a quarter acre, which is what was set out at Federation, even though they didn't put it in law, unfortunately. You can have a water tank so you can drink clean water. You can have a septic tank that disposes properly of all the human waste. You can hook that septic tank through that nice little pipe they stick up in the air. They don't like pollution from gas, but they put it all up in the air anyway, methane from your system. Otherwise your toilet will bubble all day. But if you hook that through a tank with a non-return valve, you could run the heating in your house and your stove on that gas. Why aren't we doing it? But we're too thick to go and read up how to do it. They built these gas converters during the war. Why aren't we using them? Why aren't we using the technology designed by Australians? It's there. Some of the best technology in the world come out of here. And what are we doing with it? Giving it away. The Midland Workshops was closed because the good old Labor Party, and they have good blokes, not, decided to sell off the bogies. The only thing that made the railways in this country viable. They sold it to Victoria, already Shanghai, it straight to Japan. They got rid of something that was making millions for this country every year, just like everything else. Right, back to your constitution. Keep going back and forwards. Boundaries and the COVID virus. Coronavirus is respiratory. It is simply the flu. Depends what levels you go back. Get an old bottle of Dettol or some of those cleaning agents from 50 years ago. It's on there. Get rid of the virus, yeah. Marvellous. Try washing your hands to get rid of it too. That'd be a good start. Don't cough in someone's face. I mean, the stupidity of what's going on. Now, can the states have quarantine? No, they can't. It's in your constitution. Like the unwilling with this. I reckon they can. The reason I'm going back to reading from the Constitution, a lot of people criticise, no, you never put it in there. Or tell me, all right, 69 of the Constitution, on the date of dates to be proclaimed by the Governor-General after the establishment of the Commonwealth, the following departments of the public service in each state shall become transferred to the Commonwealth. Posts, telegraphs and telephones, naval and military defence, lighthouses, lightships, beacons and buoys, quarantine. It was taken off the states of Federation and was vested in the Commonwealth as an exclusive legislative authority of the Commonwealth. Who does it? The states. They got a national cabinet, that's nice. I've got my cabinet, it sits in the lounge room, and I had one. But that's the cabinet there's any value against theirs. Theirs is garbage, it's treason, it's fraud on the people. That cabinet sits without any debate on legislation. No legislation put together by a lawful parliament, because Parliament can't put it together. It has to be the executive part of the Parliament sitting under the authority of the Governor-General at federal level and the states at state level. How did they get around it? By wiping out our constitutions. All of them. They started in Western Australia by putting a constitution in place with 32 sections missing. When I took the Governor of Western Australia to court, he didn't like it. He never appeared, the lawyer did. Real nice little gentleman. Anyway, the Governor never appeared, and I used that to my advantage because I kept arguing all the points. The Constitution was never lawful. He could not hold that Constitution. And they come up with the ploy that this is all done under Act passed under the authority of Queen Victoria. I said, well, that's a bit funny. You got it in the first 2 weeks of Federation after that she died. I said, then your problem is, unless you went back in the time machine and got them to sign off on, didn't happen. These things were removed prior to Federation. They had to go back because of the letters patent issued by Queen Victoria. They weren't. So this state has never lawfully been established. So no laws passed by the Parliament of Western Australia since Federation are valid. We're not the only one, no worry, it gets better. Queensland 1929 removed its upper house. Gone, finished. Their state doesn't exist either. And it gets better. South Australia in 1964 changed its constitution from the people having all the authority to the Parliament having the authority over the people. That's gone. And not to be outdone, Victoria thought, we'll better you, we remove the constitution altogether. 1975, and put another one in. But that didn't cause the biggest kerfuffle in this country. What caused the biggest kerfuffle in this country was the establishment of another form of government called local government. Now, when you go to your constitution, page 936, you go down the 8th line, it says that legislative authority is to establish municipal authorities and local government. This is where you've got to read back through your constitution and understand local government is the state parliament. It passes bylaws. Why? Because they're passed pursuant to the constitution, subject to the Commonwealth legislation under 109 of our constitution. State legislation, where it contravenes federal legislation, federal legislation stands the state is nullified in that area. That's simple. Now, how far can the Parliament of the Commonwealth go with legislation? Go to HCA 39 in 1915 and paragraph 148. So Samuel Griffiths, who wrote the Constitution, was the Chief Justice, and he stated at 148, paragraph 148, that is, here we find section 106 finds the state constitution and all laws made pursuant to it to the overriding authority of the Commonwealth Constitution. If there still remains a legislative area that can be exercised, it has to be exercised with the consequences of 109. When it is repugnant to federal legislation, it is void ab initio. Gone, finished, as the establishment. Then he said, it is beyond the legislative authority of any parliament to pass a law that overrides Commonwealth law. He's talking about state constitutions, by the way, and state legislation, overrides Commonwealth law backed up by the Constitution. Well, 15A of the Acts Interpretation Act says every single act must be construed to and comply with the Constitution. Very, very clear. Go to chapter 1, page 346 of your Constitution. It says not all enactments of the Parliament are valid, but those passed pursuant to, in accordance with, and under the authority granted by the Constitution, and those laws only are binding on the courts, judges and people. All other laws are void. That's pretty clear. Then it goes further and it says, if an authority isn't granted to a Parliament, it's denied and remains with the people. Who's got the authority? Must go to the people. Right, now in 1974, they purported to put a referendum to the people to grant us another tier of government, being local government. We said no. Decidedly right across this country. And it failed. 1977, they tried to backdoor it by asking us to give permission to the federal parliament to be able to finance local government direct, which would have resulted in us accepting that the federal government could establish local government and they could pay them direct. So we would have local government backdooring. That failed. 1988, they put a question to us to add 119A to our Constitution. They did it by 4 distinct questions. The first one, do you approve the continuance of local government? We said no. Then the second one was, do you approve the establishment of local government? We said no. Do you approve the empowering of local government? We said no. Do you approve local government passing bylaws for their immediate area? We said no. No, 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 and no. What's wrong with these brain-dead clowns? They don't know what no means. The 2 simplest words in the English language. Yes, and you can do it. No, and you can't. If you can't continue it. Now, their excuses when you go on the Supreme Court, Wheeler, Paul and Voss said to me in 2006, in the 6th of November 2006, when I was before them, after I told her to sit up because she was hanging on a chair, hanging like this on the chair. I said, you mind? She said, what's your problem? I said, it's not mine, it's yours. Show some respect to the Queen, sit up straight. And she sat up, she didn't say much. Then I asked her under what authority she sat. I don't either. And then I put it to her in relation to the law. And she came back and said, the federal parliament puts the referendums out under federal law. I said, well, that's not exactly true. She said, well, I rule it. You can't rule against the Constitution. Referendums are done state by state so as not to offend the laws of a state. And it's a majority of people in a majority of states who vote for something, it passes. A majority of people in a majority of states vote against it, it's dismissed. It's done at state level under a federal law, which isn't necessary because the Constitution denotes how a referendum is carried out. You must look at how the Constitution says the government can do things, the Parliament. Sorry, I keep referring to the government, they're not. We're the government. Like it or not, we're the Commonwealth, we're the government. They operate by our votes for a period of time as not sovereign entities, but subservient entities to the people. Pass laws for the good governance of us, not over us. You must get that in your head. They are there to serve us. You cannot serve us if you're passing laws over us. And this is the biggest thing, bugbear. Right, now, how did they can themselves? 1979, number 88 of 1979 was the Act in the Western Australian Parliament that gave the state parliament the purported authority to have a system of local government. They removed the electoral boundaries out of the state constitution, which is a letters patent. That's an act of treason against the Crown of England because it's a letters patent. Only the monarch can change it. Nobody else. Then they added in local government and all the local government areas. Not a boundary. They can't have a boundary because of clause 8. They can't have a boundary. It's the end of the story. Now, where you people let go then, they added that act to the state constitution. It didn't bother to go to us. But they just added to the state constitution. What did they do? They wiped out every single constitution in this country if they still existed, except the Commonwealth one. Because the state constitutions continue subject to the federal. Now, when I was before the court in 2006, one of their rulings is the states existed before federation and the Commonwealth has come along, sat neatly over the top and enhanced it. Not a lot of hogwash. James Andrew McGinty and others, which was a state parliament, put a case to the High Court to try and prove that. That was in 1996, HCA 48. Yeah, that's correct. At paragraph 17, the High Court ruled that no, the state constitutions are established by the Commonwealth Constitution and Federation under 106. They draw their authority referentially from that constitution, and it goes into great detail on what 106 actually means. And sometimes people say, oh no, the government's got all these plenary powers. Well, no, they don't. Plenary power is full and complete power. They don't have we so. Then it goes on and it states in that decision, the states are established, they didn't exist before federation, they were established on the 1st of January 1901 under the provisions of 107, 108 and 109 of the Commonwealth Constitution Act 1900 UK and the Commonwealth Constitution derived from. And they draw their authority referentially from it, which means you go back to Griffiths, you cannot pass a law that contravenes the Commonwealth Constitution and the state legislation, unless it's decidedly granted by the Constitution, isn't it? I mean, you really have to understand what these peanuts are trying to tell you, that this is our Constitution, the Parliament's established by it, so it sits there underneath, under the authority granted. If that authority is granted by the Constitution, how could they establish the Australia Act? How can they establish the World Scholars and Titles Act and everything else? How can they do that? Because they derive their authority from there. So where in there does it give them the authority to come out and sit on top and tell us what to do? It doesn't. You've got to understand we the people, are the authority.